20 seconds to comply, or we fire." The F-22 pilot's voice roared through the sky. The cabin shook violently, passengers screaming in terror, oxygen masks falling everywhere. A businessman shot up from his seat, yelling, "We're all going to die!" At that moment, from seat 18B, a woman in a white blouse stained with dried blood calmly stood up. She walked straight to the emergency radio, yanking the microphone from the co-pilot's trembling hand. Her voice rang out, decisive and clear. "Medic Zero, reporting." Outside, 2 F-22s froze, as if they'd just heard an echo from a forgotten battlefield. Emily Carter, 36 years old, former battlefield medic from Afghanistan, now working as a rural county doctor, was taking a commercial flight to attend a medical conference. Her journey had been rushed, coming straight from an emergency shift at the hospital. She had hurried to the airport after a grueling night of trauma cases, her white blouse still bearing the faint stains of dried blood from patients she had fought to save. There hadn't been time to change. The conference registration deadline was approaching, and this was the last available flight. She clutched a worn leather briefcase containing old medical files, including her military medical identification card with its distinctive call sign engraved in faded silver. The weight of those documents represented years of service, saving lives under impossible conditions in one of the world's most dangerous war zones. Other passengers noticed her appearance and whispered among themselves, "Flying on a commercial airline wearing a blood-stained blouse. How unprofessional." A first-class businessman looked her up and down with obvious disdain. "Looks nice enough, but probably just some small-town doctor who couldn't save anyone important anyway." Emily remained silent, focusing instead on helping a young boy in the adjacent seat adjust his seatbelt properly, her voice warm and reassuring. "There you go. You're safe now." The aircraft began experiencing unusual turbulence, and her white blouse caught the cabin lighting, making her stand out against the chaos that was beginning to develop around them. She had learned long ago that appearances meant nothing when lives were at stake. Her stained clothing wasn't a sign of carelessness. It was evidence of dedication, proof that she had been where she was needed most, doing what she did best, saving lives regardless of personal comfort or social expectations. The businessman continued his commentary to anyone who would listen, dismissing her as irrelevant to their current situation. He had no idea that the quiet woman in the wrinkled blouse had once coordinated medical evacuations under enemy fire, had performed surgery in field hospitals while explosions shook the ground, had earned a call sign that commanded respect from military personnel around the world. Emily's medical training had taught her to remain calm under pressure, to assess situations quickly, and to act decisively when others were paralyzed by fear. Those skills had kept her alive in Afghanistan, had helped her save countless soldiers, and were about to prove invaluable once again. As the turbulence increased, she noticed details that other passengers missed: the subtle changes in cabin pressure, the specific pattern of the aircraft's movements, the barely controlled panic in the flight attendants' voices. Her combat experience had trained her to recognize when a routine situation was becoming life-threatening. The leather briefcase in her lap contained more than just medical records. Hidden among the hospital documents were commendations, citations, and official recognition of service that most civilians would never see. But more importantly, it held her military medical identification, the physical proof of a call sign that had once been legendary among combat units. She touched the briefcase gently, drawing strength from the memories it contained, the lives she had saved, the soldiers who had made it home because of her skills and dedication. Those experiences had shaped her into someone who could remain calm when others panicked, who could think clearly when chaos surrounded her, who could act when action was needed most. The aircraft continued to shake, and Emily's trained medical eye began cataloging potential injuries among the passengers, assessing who would need help first if the situation deteriorated further. Her mind automatically shifted into triage mode, prioritizing resources, planning for multiple casualty scenarios. Other passengers saw only a tired-looking woman in stained clothing. They had no way of knowing that they were sitting near someone whose medical expertise had been forged in the crucible of combat, whose call sign had once meant the difference between life and death for American soldiers fighting thousands of miles from home. The businessman's mockery continued, but Emily remained focused on what mattered: the growing signs that this routine flight was about to become something far more dangerous. Her military training was telling her to prepare for the worst, while her medical instincts were already calculating how to save as many lives as possible if the worst actually happened. Lisa Tran, 31 years old, flight attendant, seat 14C, later recalled, "I remember her eyes, calm like someone who had grown accustomed to bombs and bullets falling around them. The aircraft lurched violently to one side, cabin pressure fluctuating wildly as thick smoke began pouring from the cockpit area. The systematic failure of multiple aircraft systems created an atmosphere of barely controlled terror throughout the passenger compartment. The captain collapsed at his controls, overcome by smoke inhalation and forced to abandon his position, leaving the inexperienced co-pilot alone to handle an increasingly impossible situation. The young man's hands shook uncontrollably as he struggled with controls that were no longer responding predictably to his inputs. Throughout the cabin, chaos erupted with devastating intensity. Children screamed for their parents. Adults shouted prayers and final messages to loved ones. Many passengers were already writing what they believed would be their last words on cell phones and napkins. The radio crackled with military authority. "Commercial aircraft, you have 30 seconds to comply with our instructions, or we will be forced to take defensive action." The businessman who had been mocking Emily earlier stood up and shouted over the noise, "Don't count on help from the blood-stained doctor over there. She probably couldn't save a goldfish." His cruel comments drew nervous laughter from a few passengers who were using mockery to cope with their terror. But Emily remained focused on the rapidly deteriorating situation around them. Without hesitation, Emily stood up from her seat and began moving purposefully through the chaotic cabin, her medical training automatically taking control of her actions. Years of battlefield experience had taught her to function effectively when others were paralyzed by fear and confusion. She pushed through the panicked passengers, her eyes fixed on the cockpit, where the co-pilot was clearly overwhelmed by circumstances beyond his training or experience. The aircraft's erratic movements suggested that they were moments away from complete loss of control. Entering the cockpit, Emily immediately took the emergency radio microphone from the co-pilot's trembling hands. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the absolute authority of someone who had commanded respect in life-or-death situations. "Medic Zero! Reporting for duty!" The effect outside the aircraft was immediate and electric. The F-22 fighters that had been preparing to engage suddenly went silent, their pilots recognizing a call sign that carried legendary status within military aviation circles. After several seconds of stunned silence, the F-22 flight leader's voice came through with obvious emotion. "Medic Zero?" That call sign was retired after Afghanistan. "We thought." His words trailed off as the full implications of what he was hearing registered with pilots who understood exactly what that designation meant. Medic Zero wasn't just another military identifier. It represented someone whose medical expertise had saved entire units during some of the most dangerous combat operations in recent military history. The cabin fell completely silent as passengers realized that something extraordinary was happening. The woman they had been dismissing and mocking had just identified herself using terminology that commanded immediate respect from elite military pilots. Through the aircraft's communication system, Emily began coordinating directly with the F-22 pilots. Her voice calm and professional, despite the chaos surrounding her. "I need you to talk our co-pilot through emergency landing procedures, step by step, while I handle medical triage for passengers." The F-22 flight leader responded immediately. "Copy that. Medic Zero, beginning emergency assistance protocols now." Emily's transformation from dismissed passenger to command authority was complete and undeniable. The skills that had made her legendary in Afghanistan were now being applied to save civilian lives, demonstrating that her expertise transcended military boundaries. She quickly assessed the co-pilot's condition, determining that he was capable of following instructions despite his obvious fear and inexperience. Her medical training allowed her to recognize that his panic was manageable, that he could function effectively with proper guidance and support. Throughout the cabin, passengers began to understand that their survival now depended on the quiet woman in the stained blouse, the same person they had been ridiculing just minutes earlier. The businessman's mockery seemed pathetically inappropriate now that everyone could see her actual capabilities. Emily continued her coordination with military forces while simultaneously conducting rapid medical assessments of injured passengers. Her ability to multitask under extreme pressure was the direct result of years spent in combat zones where such skills meant the difference between life and death. The F-22 pilots began providing detailed technical assistance to the co-pilot, but it was Emily who served as the crucial link between military expertise and civilian emergency, translating complex instructions into language that the overwhelmed young pilot could understand and execute. As the aircraft began to stabilize under Emily's coordination, passengers throughout the cabin stopped their panicking and began watching her with something approaching awe. The transformation from chaos to controlled emergency response was entirely due to her intervention. The businessman who had been so vocal in his criticism earlier now sat hunched in his seat, finally understanding that his cruel comments had been directed at someone whose capabilities exceeded anything he could have imagined. Emily's voice remained steady and professional throughout the crisis, demonstrating the kind of grace under pressure that had made her call sign famous among military personnel. She was proving that the skills learned in combat could be applied to save lives in any environment. Michael Brown, 45 years old, IT engineer, seat 11B, later said, "When she spoke, I got chills. A doctor made the entire F-22 squadron show respect." News of Medic Zero's return to active status sent shockwaves through military communication networks, as personnel who remembered her legendary service in Afghanistan realized that the call sign they thought had been retired forever was now coordinating a civilian aircraft emergency. The F-22 flight leader switched to a private channel, his voice filled with emotion and gratitude. "You saved my entire squad in 2012. I'm only alive today because of your medical expertise and courage under fire." Emily retrieved her faded silver military medical identification from her leather briefcase, her hands trembling slightly, but her voice remaining steady. "I still honor the oath to save lives, whether on the ground or in the sky." The personal testimony from the F-22 pilot provided confirmation that went beyond technical authentication, offering proof that Emily's reputation was built on actual life-saving actions rather than administrative credentials. Military command centers throughout the region began coordinating comprehensive support for the civilian aircraft. Understanding that someone with Emily's capabilities deserved every available resource to ensure mission success, the F-22 pilots began working directly with the overwhelmed co-pilot, providing step-by-step technical guidance for emergency landing procedures, but it was Emily who served as the crucial translator, converting complex military terminology into language that a civilian pilot could understand and execute under extreme pressure. Throughout the cabin, passengers gradually stopped their panicking and began focusing on Emily's calm, authoritative voice. Her presence had transformed a chaotic emergency into a coordinated rescue operation, demonstrating leadership qualities that commanded respect from both military professionals and terrified civilians. The businessman who had spent the flight ridiculing Emily attempted to continue his criticism, but other passengers immediately silenced him. "Be quiet and let her concentrate. She's trying to save all our lives." The entire cabin fell silent except for Emily's clear, steady voice, providing coordination between the aircraft and military support. Her ability to remain calm under pressure was having a stabilizing effect on everyone around her, proving that true leadership could inspire confidence even in the most desperate circumstances. As the aircraft approached the runway for emergency landing, tension throughout the cabin reached unbearable levels. Passengers held hands, said prayers, and focused on Emily's voice as their anchor in the storm of fear and uncertainty. The F-22 pilots continued providing technical guidance, but everyone understood that the success of the landing would depend on Emily's ability to keep the co-pilot calm and focused. Her medical training, combined with her combat experience, had prepared her perfectly for this moment. Emily's coordination between military support and civilian emergency response was flawless, demonstrating tactical awareness and communication skills that had been forged in the crucible of battlefield medicine. She was proving that the same qualities that made her legendary in Afghanistan could save lives in any environment. The aircraft's landing gear touched the runway with jarring impact, but the co-pilot, guided by Emily's steady voice and the F-22 pilot's technical expertise, managed to keep the aircraft under control. The entire cabin erupted in tears of relief as they realized they had survived. Outside the aircraft, the F-22 fighters performed a traditional salute, banking their wings in recognition of Emily's role in the successful emergency landing. It wasn't just a salute to a fellow pilot, but acknowledgement of a medical professional whose courage had saved lives both in combat and civilian emergency. The transformation in passenger attitudes was complete and permanent. The woman they had dismissed as irrelevant had proven to be the most qualified person aboard to handle the crisis, demonstrating capabilities that commanded respect from military professionals and grateful civilians alike. Emily's leather briefcase, which passengers had initially ignored, was now understood to contain evidence of service and sacrifice that few people could comprehend. Her military medical identification represented years of dedication to saving lives under impossible conditions, a commitment that continued even in civilian life. The co-pilot, who had been paralyzed by fear and inexperience at the beginning of the emergency, found his confidence restored through Emily's guidance and support. Her ability to inspire calm competence in others had been crucial to their survival. Throughout the cabin, passengers were beginning to understand that they had witnessed something extraordinary, a legendary military medic applying combat-tested skills to save civilian lives, proving that true expertise transcended boundaries between military and civilian service. The businessman's earlier mockery now seemed not just inappropriate, but pathetically ignorant. His assumptions about Emily's capabilities had been based on superficial judgments rather than any understanding of her actual qualifications and experience. Emily remained focused on coordinating the final phases of the emergency landing, her voice steady and professional despite the magnitude of what she had just accomplished. Her humility in the face of extraordinary achievement was consistent with the character that had made her legendary among military personnel. As emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft on the runway, passengers understood that their survival was entirely due to the intervention of someone they had initially dismissed and ridiculed. The lesson about assumptions and respect had been delivered in the most dramatic way possible. The F-22 pilots continued broadcasting their admiration and gratitude over military frequencies, ensuring that Emily's role in the successful emergency response would be recognized throughout the aviation community. Emily's transition from dismissed passenger to emergency coordinator demonstrated the kind of quiet competence that characterized truly exceptional individuals. She had not sought recognition or authority, but had simply stepped forward when circumstances required her unique combination of skills and experience. The aircraft came to a complete stop, and the cabin filled with the sound of grateful tears and whispered prayers of thanksgiving. Everyone aboard understood that they owed their lives to the woman in the stained white blouse, the same person they had been mocking just hours earlier. Emily methodically packed her leather briefcase and prepared to disembark, her demeanor as calm and professional as if she had just completed a routine medical consultation rather than coordinating a life-saving emergency response. The silver military identification card disappeared back into her briefcase, where it would remain until the next time circumstances required her to prove that some call signs never truly retire. They simply wait for the moment when their unique capabilities are needed most. David Miller, 52 years old, journalist, seat 9A, later reported, "I filmed the entire incident. The businessman who had mocked her sat with his head down in shame, while a doctor had just saved the entire sky." As the aircraft came to a complete stop on the runway, passengers throughout the cabin began crying with relief and gratitude. The terror that had gripped them throughout the emergency was finally releasing, replaced by overwhelming appreciation for the woman who had saved their lives. Nobody applauded. Instead, everyone stood and stepped aside, creating a clear path for Emily to exit the aircraft first. The gesture was spontaneous and unanimous, a recognition that she deserved honor rather than the mockery she had received earlier. A young girl approached Emily hesitantly, holding out the silver military identification card that had fallen from her briefcase during the emergency. "You're a real hero, aren't you?" Emily knelt down to the child's level and smiled gently, accepting the card with the same grace she had shown throughout the crisis. "We all helped each other today. That's what made the difference." News of the incident spread rapidly across social media platforms, with the hashtag "She was just on a routine flight," until her call sign made the F-22s freeze trending worldwide as passengers shared their first-hand accounts of witnessing a legendary military medic save civilian lives. The businessman who had spent the flight ridiculing Emily posted a public apology that went viral. "Medic Zero taught me that you don't need weapons to save the sky, just a heart dedicated to saving lives. I was completely wrong about everything." His confession resonated with millions of people who recognized their own tendency to make assumptions based on appearances rather than actual capabilities. The story became a powerful reminder about the danger of judging others superficially. The image that captured public imagination was Emily walking through the airport, her white blouse still bearing stains from her hospital shift, carrying the worn leather briefcase that contained evidence of her extraordinary service record. Social media posts began featuring images of blood-stained medical scrubs and faded military identification cards, symbols of dedication and sacrifice that people now understood represented quiet heroism rather than carelessness or unprofessionalism. Emily's story inspired healthcare workers around the world who had faced similar dismissive attitudes about their appearance after long shifts saving lives. Her dignity in the face of mockery, followed by her extraordinary competence during crisis, became a rallying point for medical professionals everywhere. Military veterans shared their own stories about combat medics who had saved their lives, explaining why the call sign Medic Zero commanded such respect within military communities. The public began to understand that battlefield medicine required capabilities that exceeded those of most civilian medical practice. Aviation experts analyzed Emily's coordination between military and civilian emergency response, recognizing tactical skills that could only have been developed through actual combat experience. Her ability to remain calm under pressure while managing complex communication protocols demonstrated training that went far beyond standard medical education. The incident became a case study in emergency management, showing how individual expertise could prevent disasters when institutional systems failed. Emily's intervention had succeeded where standard protocols had been inadequate, proving the value of experience and adaptability in crisis situations. Children who had been on the flight began drawing pictures of Emily, depicting her as a guardian angel in medical scrubs rather than a traditional superhero. Their innocent perspective captured something important about her character. She was extraordinary, not because of supernatural powers, but because of dedication to serving others. The F-22 pilots who had participated in the emergency response began sharing their own stories about Emily's legendary status within military aviation circles, explaining why her call sign had commanded immediate respect and cooperation from elite fighter pilots. Hospital administrators at Emily's rural medical facility found themselves fielding calls from major medical centers offering prestigious positions, but Emily declined all offers, preferring to continue serving the small community that needed her most. Emily's story demonstrated that true heroism often came from people who appeared ordinary but possessed extraordinary dedication to helping others. Her stained blouse and worn briefcase had initially seemed like signs of carelessness, but were actually evidence of a life spent in service to others. If you believe that real strength doesn't come from physical power, type, "I will live kindly." Emily declined all interview requests, quietly leaving the airport through a service exit to avoid the growing crowd of reporters and admirers who wanted to hear more about the emergency response that had saved 200 lives. Sarah Nguyen, 27 years old, graduate student, seat 22D, later described the scene. "I saw her walking away, so small, her blouse wrinkled and stained, carrying that old briefcase. She left behind a silence that commanded everyone's respect." The lesson extended far beyond aviation safety or emergency response. Emily had proven that the people we dismiss as ordinary often possess extraordinary capabilities, and that true heroism comes from dedication to serving others rather than seeking recognition or glory. Medical schools began incorporating Emily's story into their curriculum, not just as an example of emergency medicine, but as a demonstration of how medical professionals should maintain their commitment to saving lives regardless of circumstances or environment. The military identification card was eventually donated to the Smithsonian Museum, where it was displayed with an inscription that captured the essence of her service. Medic Zero. She carried her oath, and it saved the sky. Emily returned to her work at the rural county hospital, where her colleagues now understood that the quiet doctor they worked alongside possessed capabilities that extended far beyond routine medical practice. Her stained scrubs and tired appearance after long shifts were no longer seen as unprofessional, but as evidence of dedication. The businessman's public apology had sparked a broader conversation about respect for healthcare workers, particularly those who served in combat zones or worked in under-resourced facilities where conditions were challenging and recognition was rare. Emily's story became a symbol of the invisible heroism that surrounds us daily. The quiet competence of people who have dedicated their lives to serving others. The extraordinary capabilities hidden behind ordinary appearances. The leather briefcase she carried became iconic, representing the idea that everyone carries their own history of service and sacrifice, and that we should treat others with respect, because we never know what challenges they have overcome or what capabilities they possess. Military veterans began sharing stories about combat medics who had saved their lives, explaining why terms like Medic Zero carried such weight within military communities. The public gained new appreciation for the medical personnel who had served in dangerous conditions to protect others. Emily's refusal to seek publicity or recognition after the incident reinforced the authenticity of her character. She had not intervened to become famous, but simply because her training and oath required her to help when others needed assistance. The viral nature of her story demonstrated public hunger for examples of genuine heroism, people who acted selflessly when circumstances demanded it. Individuals whose dedication to serving others inspired hope in an often cynical world. Years later, when people discussed the incident, they remembered not just the dramatic emergency landing, but the lesson about assumptions and respect. Emily had taught them that heroism often wears scrubs instead of capes, carries medical equipment instead of weapons, and works quietly in places where recognition is rare, but need is great. Her stained white blouse became a powerful symbol. Sometimes the most important people are those who look like they've been working too hard to save others, rather than those who dress to impress strangers. Message: the sky isn't just protected by pilots. Sometimes a medic with call sign Medic Zero can save hundreds of lives by simply keeping the oath to heal. If you believe in stories that touch the heart like this one, leave a comment. And don't forget to subscribe to SN Quiet Stories. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten. Real people are creating and telling stories, not mass-produced AI.